Welcome back from the break. I would like to go on with the course, and the next topic would be joint arrangements or joint control. And with the definition, I would like to start. So what is a joint arrangement and what is joint control? So there were a lot of different definitions in the past. So when you look into old literature, you might be a little bit confused because what we now call joint arrangements was in the past called joint control. So the IASB tried to find a term which is broader than what was before, and we will use the term joint arrangement to categorize a contract between two or more parties that will have joint control over an investee. So that joint arrangement is the overall term for such contracts. And there are two different categories in which a joint arrangement can be distinguished. One is joint operation and the other is joint venture. So please, when we're talking about a joint arrangement, that is the broadest term. And a joint arrangement can have two specific characteristics. So one will then be called a joint operation, and the other one is a joint venture. So what is exactly joint control? Well, exactly, it means that you will share the control that normally only one investee has, and in that case, the investor is called a parent. So normally control is only executed by one party. And in this case, when you have joint control, then the control is jointly operated, executed by two or more parties. So that is joint control. Now, we can look at the type of the joint arrangement. And I already said, well, it could be two types. One is joint operation and the second is the joint venture. So now what is the difference, you may ask, between a joint operation and a joint venture? Well, it depends on the characteristics of such a contract. So when you have, or when the investor has rights to specific assets, and the investor has the obligation for specific liabilities, then we are calling this a joint operator, and the joint arrangement will be a joint operation. Because obviously the operation of the things that the joint arrangement does is the differentiator. When we look at single assets, we look at single liabilities, and we look at single operations of that investee. And therefore, we see that the assets and the liabilities are separated. There might be two operations within that company. So when everything is separated, we call it a joint operation, because the investee is operated jointly, but the assets, liabilities, and operations are clearly distinct. When we look at the joint operation, when we look at the joint arrangement as when they have rights to the net assets. So not to a specific asset, but to the whole net assets. And they are obliged for the net assets, for the net liabilities as such. And they do not have rights to the various operations. So we call that a joint venture. And the parties are called joint venturers. So we have to look at the type of the joint arrangement, and we have to decide whether it is a joint operation or is a joint venture. So let me have an example. I think pictures say more than 1,000 words. So I tried it with 1,000 words, so maybe that didn't work. So let me explain the same thing again with these examples. So we have joint arrangements, and two or more parent companies share control. So you can see that from this picture here. Entity A and entity B are sharing the control. They both have exactly 50%. So nobody can rule or have power on its own. They have to join their power in order to do something. So if A says, well, we will invest something, and B says, no, we will not invest, well, then there will not an investment be, okay? So the joint control will be with A and B. So why do we call this a joint venture and this a joint operation? Well, in this case, in the first case, the two venturers, so we have two venturers over here, they have rights to the net assets here. So they don't look at single assets like these two entities are here in the second example. So in the second example, this is a joint operation. Why? Because the joint arrangement here has a power plant, and they have a gas pipeline. So think of a gas pipeline that is going from Laos to Vietnam. And in Vietnam, you have a power plant, and that power plant is operated by Entity B, which is a Vietnamese company. And in Laos, where you have the gas coming out of the earth, and they have built a pipeline from Laos to Vietnam. I don't know whether this is thinkable, but let's just assume. So we have a gas pipeline from Laos to Vietnam, and that is operated by Entity A, which is a company based in Laos. So that is a joint operation, because B is looking for the plant, and A is looking for the gas pipeline and delivering gas to, let's say, Ho Chi Minh City. And in that case, they have formed a joint arrangement, which is a joint operation, because A is responsible for the assets of the pipeline, B is responsible for the assets of the power plant, and obviously the liabilities in relation with the power plant, they will have to be paid by B if in trouble, and the gas pipeline is same thing with A. So they just have a joint arrangement to operate the total business, but they look through that arrangement, right? So in this first case, they do not look through, they just look on the net assets. They look at the net operations of that company, and that makes it different. So in the first case, we would call this joint arrangement a joint venture. And in the second, you would call that a joint operation. And to make it even more complicated, in the past, the overall term was joint venture, and joint operation didn't exist at that time. So please do not be confused when you read old literature, which uses the term joint venture. You may be confused by that. All right, so we now understand what is a joint arrangement, and we know that this joint arrangement will be split into a joint venture or joint operation, depending on the facts and circumstances of the contract. All right, but I think that's enough for the moment to understand what joint arrangements are. And the next definition is an associated company. We already know that there has to be a significant influence to call an investee an associated company. If there is more than significant influence, well, when we control the investee, then we will not call this an associate, but a subsidiary. Yes, correct. All right, so what are the definitions? And you will find them in IAS 28, paragraph 3. An associate is an entity over which the investor has significant influence. So the significant influence is the power to participate in the financial and operating policy decisions of the investee, but it is not enough to control or joint control the investees. So it is something different. So if an entity holds directly or indirectly, so through subsidiaries, 20% or more of the voting power of the investee, it is presumed that the entity has significant influence, unless it can clearly be demonstrated that this is not the case. So I told you there is no bright line, there is no black and white. We assume that in the first place, but the entity or the investor can clearly demonstrate if this is not the case, then well, the company will argue with the accountant, with the auditor, and they will have a discussion about that. Okay, so a substantial or majority ownership by another investor does not necessarily preclude an entity from having significant influence. So that is what IAS 28 says about that. All right, so what is the evidence? Normally when I was explaining significant influence, for instance, if the controller of the parent wants to set up the group accounts, and he or she needs some information from the associate, then the controller will pick up the phone and ask the controller of the investee, please send me an email with the following information, right? And if the controller of the investee then says, you're stupid, and then hangs up the telephone, well, obviously you don't have a significant influence, right? So that is a sign how you can find out whether you have significant influence. Of course, the IASB explains it a little bit different, but I think you get the point. So the representation on the board of directors or equivalent governing bodies of the investee. So if you have someone on the board sitting from your own personnel, then obviously you as an investor have some influence on the decision-making of the board, because you're represented by somebody. Even if you have not 50% or more, you could have somebody sitting on the board with less than 50%. Yes, or there is a contract between the investor and the investee that the policy-making process might be influenced by the investor. At least when it comes to decision-making on dividends or other distributions. So there could be, in practice, a lot of contracts that would be have to be looked at when deciding on significant influence. Or think of material transactions between the entity and its investee. So let's assume you have a company in which you are invested only by 15%. But you have a contract to deliver rare earth. I hope you understand that term. So rare earth is used in making batteries and things like that. So it's rare earth obviously is very rare, and therefore it is something that you don't get from many suppliers. You just get it from very few suppliers, and therefore even if you have 15%, you could say, well, if you don't do what I want, then I will not deliver the rare earth anymore. So obviously the material, there is a transaction, a purchasing from that investee, from the investor, and if the investee does not do what the investor wants, then they will no longer get some rare earth from the supplier, from the investor. So there could be such a case. Or you have the same people sitting on the board. There is an interchange of managerial personnel. So that could be something. Or technical information, same thing as material transactions. Well, that is something, products that are delivered, but there could also be technical information on something, like a formula for a vaccine or a formula for a drug, for a medicine, something like that. So you could also have that kind of an influence on the investee. So it really depends on the facts and circumstances whether there is an associate, and in doubt, you have to discuss that with your auditor. All right, but I think for the normal cases here in our course, we will just stick to the 20-50 rule and assume that there is a significant influence between 20 and 50, and there is control over 50. But I tell you, in practice, there might be other things you have to look at. Okay, so what is a normal investment? Well, it's when you have no significant influence and when you do not control. So if an entity is not controlled by another investor or has another investor significant influence over that entity, well, the investor has no significant influence. So if an entity holds directly or indirectly less than 20% of the voting power of the investee, it is presumed that this entity has no significant influence. Thus, it can be clearly demonstrated that this is not the case. So IAS 25 in reverse. So when you have a company where you have no significant influence in, then the consequence is that there will be no consolidation of that company, of that investee. The investment is just included in the financial assets as a normal asset and will be shown in the group accounts as a financial asset. All right, to make sure that we all understand what we have just said, I will deliver, as promised, a complex example. And here you can see on this slide, page 40, you will see a group. So the group is led by a parent company. So that is how a parent company would be described. So A is in Saigon and the company is the parent. And now the structure looks very complicated, yeah, when you look at these companies here. So obviously there are five, 5 direct investments. So the A holds 25% of B in Hanoi. It holds 90% of G in New York. It holds 51% of R located in Berlin, 60% of S in Moscow, and 45% of N in Singapore. And then the group is also comprised of, this is what we call direct investments, so direct investees. And here are indirect investees, because not A holds it directly, but A holds it indirectly over another investment. So you can see here that G, which is a direct investment of A, holds 20% of B in Hanoi. And also H in London, which is hold 48% by G, which is 90% held by A, and H is holding another 10% in B in Hanoi. So the question is, how much is this controlled or influenced by the group? So can you add 25 plus 20 plus 10? Or do you have to multiply 90% of 20 is 18%? So what would you think? And I think that is part of your group discussion. So please, and that is require, please discuss which investee, or which of these group companies is a subsidiary, so that must be controlled by the group, or which one is an associate, so they don't control this. Investee is not controlled, but at least the group may have a significant influence on that company, or whether it is a normal investment. So, well, consolidation method has been used. We did not talk about that one, so I think just forget that question. I just make a note that I will change the slide afterwards. So, okay, here is the complex case study, and please use that form to mark clearly in blue, it's a subsidiary, make these red lines when it is an associate. When it's a normal investment, then just leave it like that, and a joint arrangement should be made, shown like this. So I will send you now in breakout rooms, and you can